Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report as we look ahead to a brand new year and a new set of challenges for America and the Biden administration. I'm Paul Gigot, and we begin with the coronavirus pandemic now entering its third year. President Biden promising to distribute 500 million at-home tests as cases of the rapidly spreading Omicron variant mount and testing demand ramps up, causing long waits and delayed results in states across the country. This as the CDC shortens its recommended isolation for most people who test positive or have been exposed to the virus to 5 days from 10, amid growing evidence that people are most infectious in the early days of the illness. Let's bring in Dr. Marty Makary. He's a professor of health policy at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health and a Fox News medical contributor. All right, Marty, welcome again. Good to see you. So let's start with talking about the Omicron variant and where are we, in particular these new studies about T cells and how they seem to be very active in the against the Omicron variant and maybe reducing the severity of COVID.
So we got a lot of good news, Paul, this week. We got a study out of Johns Hopkins and confirmed overseas in labs that the T cell immunity from Omicron and from Delta crossover. There's good cross immunity. Now, that T cell immunity doesn't really protect you from getting the infection, but it really does prevent severe disease. It takes a few days to kick in, and it's very powerful. We also got another very promising study that answered the open question, does Omicron immunity cross over to Delta? And it was found that it gives 4 times the immunity against Delta. So it does answer the question, will Omicron displace Delta? The answer appears to be yes. So for much of the world that will not have access to a vaccine, Omicron will be nature's vaccine. And for the rest of the world, we can recognize now that at least there's an end in sight to this particular variant as Omicron sweeps across many countries.
Okay, well, with that good news in mind, talk about these new CDC guidelines reducing the quarantine period to 5 days from 10. Do you think that was a sensible move?
It was a move in the right direction, but it was really not based on new information. The CDC argued that it was based on new evidence, but the evidence they cite was a study of 6 people just describing how these 6 people a month ago had a mild Omicron infection in Nebraska. There's tremendous public pressure right now for a more reasonable and sensible set of policies. People are fatigued, they're exhausted, and they're seeing through some of these policies, recognizing they're not sustainable because 10 to 25% of the population in this country will get a respiratory infection every year. We need to have a way to learn how to live with these infections and be smart at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people on the right and the left criticizing these new guidelines. It seems to me, and if you disagree, please do, but it seems to me that this is a kind of a creeping reality that we are going to have to live with this, that we do not want to shut down society and the economy every time we get one of these new variants. What's your response to that?
That's right. If we use the same criteria for restrictions, closing schools, universal masking, quarantine, we will be in this state in perpetuity forever because of influenza, parainfluenza, rhinovirus. There are a whole host of respiratory pathogens. This one's, of course, heavily stigmatized, and we've got raw memories from days when the case fatality rate was higher, but people should feel good about their immune protection.
Now, the other controversy flaring up, a lot of criticism about the shortage of tests, or at-home rapid tests, PCR tests. Is that, and the administration, of course, rushing out to try to address that shortage? How serious do you think this is as a failure of government, or should we even be that concerned about testing at this point?
Well, it's been debated among experts whether or not a universal testing program is even something that we should be doing. Now, I happen to think that there's value in testing, but we don't do so with influenza each year. The number of tests coming out is about 160 million per month, based on the 3-month prediction of when it would take to roll out those 500 million tests that Biden announced. We need 2 billion a month in order to do the universal testing that they've called for. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have a limited scarce supply and call for universal testing in the guidance. Otherwise, you create a black market, which we're seeing, price gouging. We're magnifying inequities among poor people in the U.S., and the public is getting very frustrated. So we need good guidance on a selective testing program that really says just test in these particular situations if you're going to be around someone vulnerable or change your behavior.
So if you're asymptomatic, you're saying you shouldn't test. Just wait until you begin to have some symptoms that could be COVID, or if you are going to see somebody, a loved one, or your grandmother, or somebody who is immunocompromised or at risk, then test.
That's right. Look, that's right. If we had tests everywhere, then maybe it would make sense to test, but we've got a very limited supply. We've got to use those in a precious way.
All right. So I think I know what your answer is, but for people who are fatigued, it'll be 3 years in February where we're dealing with this in a major way. March, when the shutdowns happened 2 years ago. I think what people want to know about 2022 is, can this be the year that we look forward to actually, we know we're not going to do away and eradicate the virus, but putting it into the context where we usually consider the flu or the usual run of respiratory diseases, viruses that we cope with every year. Is this going to be that year that happens?
Yes, it is. Probably in the next few weeks, we're going to see Omicron peak, and it is spreading so quickly that may even be accelerated further. Think of it as a bad flu season when about half of everybody will probably get this infection. It will confer immunity to Delta. That evidence is in. And the therapeutics are really impressive. Not just fluvoxamine, which has been around and is currently available,
right,
but the new drugs from Merck and Pfizer. They will help significantly.
Yeah, that's also very good news. All right, thank you, Dr. Makary. Appreciate it. Still ahead as COVID cases spike again. New call.